Hello and welcome to our first 2015 live broadcast of Rights and Recourse, a program that tackles issues affecting your rights and matters of legal recourse. Thanks for joining us and wishing you all a great year. My name is Dumila Matez. Remember, you can always be part of our discussion today by tweeting us at Rights Recourse or calling our studio line on 011 714 5497 or 5498. You can also SMS your views by sending the word recourse to 34025. Alternatively, email your thoughts to rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. With the schooling season kicking off, Rights and Recourse today throws the spotlight on education matters, the right to access equality education. And this right is articulated in one of South Africa's historic documents aimed at reversing the negative effects of apartheid and colonialism, which have suppressed the rights of the majority of South Africans. Celebrating the 103rd anniversary of the ANC and 60 years of the historic document, the Freedom Charter, President Jacob Zuma promised to reclaim the spirit of the Freedom Charter, particularly its promise to open the doors of education to all.
The ANC government has made great strides in ensuring that education and training is available to all and in addressing the injustice of the past. We have put in place comprehensive and integrated education system. South Africa spends about 5% of its GDP on basic education and 1.4% on higher education. This is showing significant results. Preschool education has expanded massively. There is gender parity in school enrollment, and we are doing well in terms of the matric pass rate. We congratulate the class of 2014. We are also showing steady improvements in tertiary education. Student financial aid is increasing all the time. Our figures show that more than 1.4 million students have benefited from the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. However, the ANC is concerned at the escalating costs of tertiary education and the annual increase of fees by universities and other institutions of higher learning. This escalating cost has become another source of exclusion for the poor and vulnerable South African child. While we appreciate the autonomy of the universities, we must caution universities against practice that exclude students. Let me repeat this very important paragraph. This escalating cost has become another source of exclusion for the poor and vulnerable South African child. While we appreciate the autonomy of universities, we must caution universities against practices that exclude students.
To discuss how distant this dream is for many poor South Africans who still struggle to access quality education, I am joined in the studio by Mr. Ramasedi Mafoko, Director for School Infrastructure from the Department of Basic Education. At our Cape Town studio, we are pleased to welcome Ms. Zenanda Bue, a representative from Equal Education Law Center. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Good afternoon.
First of all, let's start with that very statement the president made, the cost of education. The cost of education has always been a bone of contention, especially regarding the aspects of private education and also the issue of fees that are going up from day to day, even at schools, even at public schools. How do we deal with this issue that is, in the president's words, leads to the exclusion of the poor African child?
Mr. Mateza, you'd remember that as a department some time back we introduced the concept of no-fee schools. Currently, we've got quite a large number of our schools in the system as no-fee schools, and as a department we are moving towards even increasing the number of no-fee schools as a way of ensuring that we provide access to the large number of our learners in our communities. So in that way, we are making sure that even the poor and the impoverished have access to education across the country.
It is so that I'm happy you mentioned the no-fee schools program of the department. We've seen even public schools upping their school fees. And when you are asked to apply for exemption, the application is so tedious that you even give up and you say, probably I should not apply for exemption.
The process shouldn't be that tedious, Mr. Mateza. However, we in any system we have to put measures in place to ensure that those who qualify make sure that they qualify for that kind of an exemption. So the process, and the department is there through our officials in districts and in provincial departments to assist those parents who might be finding the system tedious, as you mentioned, to make sure that they don't get disadvantaged through that process.
Zenade, unless you have something to add to the issue of the fees, what I want to know is probably how do we make sure in the tenets of the Bill of Rights and the tenets of the probably the Freedom Charter are adhered to when our kids have to access quality education?
Eco-education has our biggest, the main source of our campaign is to ensure that all kids have access to quality and eco-education. Now, we have a number of ideas of how the problem in South Africa isn't necessarily that kids getting access. We have almost 100% access to education and children attending schools. Now, our biggest, the main source of our biggest campaign has been to ensure that the education that they do access is quality education, and that all children, regardless of which quintile they might fall under, have access to very good education. So then some of the things that we've thought of would be ensuring that the norms and standards, which we've been campaigning for the past for over 3 years, are properly implemented now that we've had them promulgated. We would want better, more comprehensive teacher training to ensure that the teachers that are teaching the kids at school have a very good knowledge of the content that they're teaching, and to ensure that the content that we do teach our kids is challenging and it's strong. So to strengthen the content of our education and the curriculum that we give, to ensure that the kids have a better cognitive and forward-thinking way of approaching their work. And then obviously all those things put together would be a good way in ensuring that the content of the education and the education that our kids do access when they do access the education is a good one.
Let's hone into that norms and standards issue, which deals with infrastructure and all sorts of things, Mr. Mafogo. The question is, there are many schools in provinces such as Limpopo that are taught under trees. There are many schools in the Eastern Cape that are still mud schools. And apparently, in my research, it tells me that Section 5A of the South African Schools Act actually talks about norms and standards, but these were not being implemented, or norms and standards were not being put together so that they can be implemented.
No, correction, Mr. Mateza. The norms and standards for school infrastructure were promulgated in November 2013. That's when they were gazetted. So we are just above a year since the norms and standards were promulgated. And every new school that is constructed in this country are in line with those norms and standards for school infrastructure. Even in any project where you either have a renovation or upgrade or whatever, that should be conforming to those norms and standards. So to all intents and purposes, we are implementing the norms and standards for school infrastructure to ensure that all our schools have infrastructure that will provide quality education to our children.
Zananda, this issue of norms and standards, I think you guys had a big battle with the Minister of Basic Education around this very issue. Mr. Mafuku here says they were promulgated in 2013. It would seem to be they only promulgated after you guys took the minister to court. Is it true?
Yes. The norms and standards were promulgated just over a year ago. This was after almost 3 years of a sustained campaign from equal education side and engagement with the Department of Education on the importance of having norms and standards passed. One of our first campaigns was the One Library, One School, and One Librarian campaign. Through that campaign, it became very clear that there's a systematic issue in South African public schools that schools have not had access to proper infrastructure such as laboratories. Libraries was only just one of the issues that had to be contended with, which is why we moved on to the campaign for minimum norms and standards based on the South African Schools Act to ensure that all schools have a standard by which to hold the department accountable to, and to ensure that they know exactly what they're entitled to and what they can get in terms of infrastructure to ensure that their education is quality and equal.
Let me come back to this issue of the promulgation of the norms and standards. The South African Schools Act was actually promulgated in 1996, Act number 84 for 1996, as amended. But why then only promulgate the norms and standards in 2013? What was happening in the years in between?
Remember, Section 5A of the South African Schools Act was as a result of the Education Laws Amendment Act of 2008. It is then that the Section 5A that talks about the norms and standards was included in the South African Schools Act. So that was not part of the South African Schools Act originally. Now, subsequent to that, this department started the process of developing those norms and standards, and you would understand that it's a very technical process. And at some point, the department agreed that we will develop and publish these as guidelines. And subsequent to that, those guidelines were transferred they were converted into norms and standards in 2013. So that process has been ongoing. And remember that even after the guidelines were published, the guidelines are quite similar to the current norms and standards. So even then, the quality and the type of structures that we provide in our schools was in line with those guidelines, which the only thing that we did was to convert them into norms and standards, which are now binding, as she correctly says.
Well, we'll continue our discussion here on the norms and standards and infrastructure at schools and when we come back. But if you'd like to join us in today's discussion, please call us on 011 714 5497 or 5498 or tweet us at Rights Recourse or email us if you have anything to say during the week at rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. We'll be back after the break.
Who are we, you ask? This is who we are.
We are technologically driven.
We are unashamedly Afrocentric.
We advise you not only on legal matters,
but on health issues as well.
We bring imagination to life.
We celebrate arts and culture and lifestyle.
We tackle life challenges head on.
We dig deep. We probe. We question.
We invite you to take a view from our house as we tell it without fear, separating fiction from factual. We are the SABC News Channel.
All news, all global, all the time.
Zoom into Africa. This is Algeria. The president is Mr. Abdelaziz Bouteflika. Algeria got independent from France on 3 July 1914. The population is more than 36 million people. One of the major languages spoken is Arabic. Monetary unit is dinar.
Welcome back. It is clear we're talking about the education in our country, and this, whether our children can access equal education. That can only be done in a situation where there are schools that are built with toilets. This is what we mean by norms and standards, with toilets, library. What else?
Right. The norms and standards talk about basic services. First of all, here we are talking about water, sanitation, and electricity and inappropriate structures. You talked about mud schools earlier on.
Yes.
And there are very clear timeframes in those norms and standards that indicate when what has to be done. For instance, in terms of basic services, the norms and standards stipulate that in the next 3 years, all schools should have access to basic services. Then the norms and standards go on to talk about other spaces, what we refer to educational spaces, your libraries, as you've mentioned, laboratories, and computer centers, and so on. And the target is that in the next 7 years, all schools should have those kinds of services. However, the norms and standards have to be implemented over a period of 17 years, if you remember. Now, what we are saying is that by the 17th year of the implementation of the norms and standards, all our schools should have all the facilities that we need. But as I indicated already, all the new schools, we are providing those facilities. But the challenge now is in existing schools. Remember, we have in excess of 23,000 schools across the country, and the majority of them still do not have those kinds of facilities like your libraries and laboratories. But there is a very concerted effort. If you look at the money that the Treasury has been pumping into infrastructure, you'd realize that there is a seriousness by this government to ensure that we meet those targets and we provide those facilities to ensure that our learners get quality education.
I heard you mention basic amenities like libraries, and you never mentioned bathrooms, toilets, in other words. Because we've had serious issues around the issues of sanitation, especially in Limpopo, where one kid died by falling into a toilet pit, and the other one also fell into a toilet, but she survived.
That's what I mentioned, Mr. Mateza, that the first 3 years of the implementation of the norms and standards would talk to water, sanitation, and electricity. And sanitation is our focus at the moment. If you look at our implementation plans currently, there is a serious effort, a concerted effort to provide our schools with sanitation facilities. And there are clear standards that we have set out in those norms and standards in terms of what type of sanitation do you provide. For instance, we are making it very clear that certain types of sanitation are not acceptable at all, like the ones that we have mentioned, and they have
toilets.
Yes, and they have to be
felt. Some schools, people go to the felt to relieve themselves.
So those have to be done with in the next 3 years, especially, for instance, those schools that have a serious challenge of sanitation. We have put them way ahead in terms of our implementation plans, and those are the schools that we are already putting those facilities in at the moment. So sanitation is our focus at the moment. Water and electricity is our focus. Electricity is very important. For instance, if you look at things like e-education, to ensure that all our learners, even those in rural areas, get access to e-education. So electricity becomes extremely important as well. But over and above that, you would be aware of the program called the Accelerated School Infrastructure Delivery Initiative, which is ACIDI, which is meant to make sure that we eradicate all mud structures, or all, not only mud structures, but all inappropriate structures, be it mud, be it wood, be it
teaching children under a tree.
Whatever, but we don't have any of those currently, unfortunately, Mr. Mateza.
Let's just get Zenanda to update us. Zenanda, probably if you can update us around your tug of war with the Minister of Basic Education regarding these very issues we are talking about, norms and standards. Where are you now with the court cases between yourselves and the Minister?
Well, there isn't a current court case going on. The court case was settled when we reached an agreement with the minister that these norms and standards would be implemented. Now, the role that we're playing now is to monitor the implementation of the norms and standards. So there isn't a current tug of war in relation to the promulgation of the norms and standards. What we're doing is that we're playing a role where we want to do as much as possible to facilitate the proper implementation of the norms and standards to ensure that they are given effect to.
The issues here, what concerns me really to what you are saying, Mr. Mafuku, is 17 years to implement the norms and standards. That's a long time.
We agree that it's quite some time. 17 years is quite some time. That is why even the minister has made it very clear on several occasions that our children cannot wait for 17 years. We have to find ways and means to make sure that we provide those facilities in the shortest space of time as possible. And that is currently what we are doing. We are in discussion with our provinces, with Treasury as well, to provide additional funding to make sure that we congest the implementation of those norms and standards as far as possible.
In terms of these norms and standards, Zenande, I'm actually surprised Mr. Mafuku is talking only about the basic things that government needs. One of the things that we are talking about in South Africa today is no work, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. And we expect our kids to be trained in PT, in rugby, in sport, in other words, and he doesn't talk about sports facilities.
Well, the things such as sports facilities and making sure that kids have access to infrastructure to ensure that, those are all provided for in the norms and standards. Those are all provided for in the longer term. So then in the first 7 years, in the first 7 to 10 years, what the norms and standards are concentrating on are providing the infrastructure to ensure that teaching and learning occurs in a very good way. So it's the provision of classrooms, the provision of sanitation, provision of basic services. Now, then the further we go on, when we start talking about in 17 years' time and in 15 years' time, that's when the norms and standards start speaking about ensuring that the schools are provided with sports facilities, that schools are provided with playgrounds and grounds in which to play their sports in. So that hasn't been. It hasn't been forgotten by the norms and standards, as you would say. It's just that the more urgent needs are what are provided for first.
You'll probably be surprised why we stay on this issue of the norms and standards on infrastructure and those kind of things. Our view is very simple. There is no way we can expect pupils, whatever standard they are, to perform in a manner that would make them good students that pass a matric certificate or any other standard for that matter if they are taught in conditions that are not conducive to learning and teaching.
We agree, absolutely. I think we are on the same page on that one. That is why the infrastructure program has gained such prominence in the department currently. And even if you look at, I mentioned the issue of the budget earlier on, if you look at the increase in the budget over the years, currently we are talking about in excess of about 10 billion rands for school infrastructure only in the current financial year. And that amount increases to about 11 billion in the outer year, that is in 2016-17. So you could see on that basis only that there is a serious effort in terms of providing the financing, but also on the other hand, we have introduced a system of appointing well-qualified people to run our infrastructure program. So we started with the provinces and the national department. We have engineers, we have quantity surveyors, we have project managers who are qualified to make sure that we get quality out of that money that we put into the program. So we are quite serious about it.
Zenande, we have seen an exodus of African children from every morning getting into taxis, going into town to other schools. And as a result, in the township, some schools in the townships have been left vacant. There's nobody to be taught at those schools. Does this have anything to do with the lack of infrastructure in those schools in the townships?
Well, to a large extent it does. When you have a child that you believe that would get a better education in a school that's outside of the townships because of the access that school has to resources that will make the child's learning environment that much more conducive, you will have parents that are able to afford to sending their children to former Model C schools or schools that are in town and not in townships. Then what ends up happening is that you have the people that cannot afford to have their kids sent to fee schools as opposed to like no fee schools that tend to be the poorer of the schools in the country. They end up having to stay in the situation where they study in classrooms with broken windows. They study in classrooms where they do not have libraries. They do not have laboratories. So it's no one wins in the equation. If you don't have access to the resources to send your child to a school with resources, then your child gets left behind in schools that are inadequately resourced.
Mr. Mafuku, that brings me to a question I wanted to ask, especially with regard to schools in townships that are standing empty, where no school is taking place because there are not enough children to be at those schools. I read this morning that the minister is thinking of closing some schools. There's a school I saw in the newspaper a couple of weeks ago in Mpumalanga, upgraded, very well built school, but it's standing empty.
The question of schools closing is as a result of normal migration patterns, population movements.
And not what I was talking about kids getting into taxis to go to better resource schools in suburbia.
We do have that phenomenon, but to a very large extent, you must remember, in townships, you have an aging population. The reason why you have so many...
Are you saying to me no kids are born in townships?
No, they are. They are. But to a very large extent, you have an aging population in our townships. And you don't have that active, So that is why you have such a large number of schools closing in townships. However, you have an influx, for instance, in Gauteng, only almost every year, we have an influx of over 20,000 learners into our province. So what happens is that there are moves to ensure that we keep those schools open, such that when we have those kinds of pressures of population moving into those provinces, then we will utilize those kinds of schools. Now, you are correct that and the phenomenon of schools closing is not only in townships, it's across the country, even in formally white areas as well.
I remember there was a call from the former MEC for education in the Western Cape, who also was closing some schools.
Exactly. That is the issue. Even in the Western Cape, even as I say, across the country, you do have that kind of a phenomenon.
We'll come back to that. We'll continue with that. You might be surprised why we're talking about infrastructure instead of talking about the matric results. We want to demonstrate that children cannot learn in situations that are not conducive to learning. If you'd like to join us and take part in this discussion, you can call us on 011 714 5497 or 5498. Or tweet us at Recourse or email us if you have anything that you want us to talk about at rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. We'll be back after the break.
There's an explosion of studies showing that cannabis causes or is related to schizophrenia.
I have been using cannabis almost daily for the last 30 years.
If it had no side effects and it had no harmful effects, we wouldn't have been sitting here.
If cannabis was going to cause me brain damage, I really don't think that from a personal point of view that I would be sitting here today.
The fact is that you cannot just do what you want.
Watch Newsroom with me, Evan Janssen, weekdays at 9 a.m. on the SABC News channel.
I would say there's no supplements or minerals, something that you can take will completely prevent cancer.
Although vitamins help the body produce and use energy, they do not provide energy themselves because they don't contain calories. Supplements also cannot be used to replace foods or make up for poor dietary habits.
Cases in Liberia are currently doubling every 15 to 20 days, and those in Sierra Leone and Guinea are doubling every 30 to 40 days.
Hi, I'm Dr. Sello Matau. Watch Health Talk every Saturday on SABC News.
Welcome back. Let's have a look at here what the Twitter community is saying on social media. Oh, we've got some there. Big Boy Maponya, I think he's from Limpopo, saying by making sure that learners understand everything they teach. I don't know what he means by that, but Danny Mutobi from Kimberley, Khalishiwa says the central role of education in a man's toolbox is for ensuring that he does not extinct himself. William Nisi says pupils are still subjected to teachers without sufficient training and infrastructure and conditions that are not good. I think we spoke about that. I don't know whether you want to respond to some of those. We spoke about what William Nisi was talking about.
Yes, and I think I need to reiterate what I was saying earlier on. It's true that especially in some of our rural areas, we still have to work harder to improve the condition of our learners, especially as it relates to infrastructure. And that is why we are concentrating, especially in those rural provinces, for instance, your Limpopo, your Eastern Cape. That is where the thrust of the Accelerated School Infrastructure Delivery Initiative is, especially in the Eastern Cape, to ensure that we eradicate those mud structures, to ensure that we provide our learners with conditions and spaces that are conducive for them to receive education. And we will continue to do that. As I indicated, we have put in quite a lot of measures and programs to ensure that we accelerate the program and make sure that those learners in your deep rural areas do get access to quality education as well.
Zenande, I would have thought that MECs who are, especially in provinces with huge rural area space, like the Eastern Cape and Limpopo and KwaZulu-Natal, would be the custodians of those schools and see to it that there is a system that is applied to rural schooling. How then, what is the relationship between MECs and the minister in this case?
In the case, can you repeat the question, please?
The question is, what role do MECs play? I see whenever you take action in the education space, you take action against the minister. And yet there is an MEC in the province who's supposed to see to it that these things are done in those provinces.
Well, when we take action, we usually take action against all relevant structures within the government. So we'll engage with the MEC, we'll engage with the HOD, and we'll engage with the minister. All these three department officials are they're tasked with the running of the education system. So we don't speak to one or the other. So the MEC has a massive role in ensuring that there are enough schools in their province, that the schools are properly resourced, and that all the kids have access to the schools that within his own province. So the MEC is responsible for the schools in his province and ensuring that they run properly in conjunction with the minister and the HOD.
Before, I would like Mr. Mafuku to respond to that, but before you respond to that, let's take this call from Limpopo. Peter, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse. Hello, Peter. Peter, are you there? Well, we thought Peter was there whilst we're waiting for Peter to come online. Mr. Mafuku, what is the relationship between what the MECs are supposed to do and the minister?
Right. Remember, in terms of the South African Schools Act, the MEC for education in a province is responsible for providing access to schools to learners in that particular province. So that is the primary responsibility. However, remember that we are not living, our system of governance in the country is not a federal kind of a system. So the minister, the MECs in provinces reports to the minister at national level, who coordinates the total.
In other words, I can be an MEC and lazy around because we don't have a federal system in this country.
No, there is no way that can be done. Remember, the MECs meet with the minister on a regular basis at a forum called we call it the CEM, the Council for Education Ministers, on a regular basis, and that is where MECs are called into account to the minister, and that is where the minister ensures that the programs as stipulated at the national level are implemented. So there is that two-way traffic between national and provinces to ensure that whatever is targeted is done in a province. And remember also, the role of the national department is to monitor what provinces are doing. And that is exactly the two-way role that I'm talking about.
Well, let's try Peter again from Limpopo. Peter, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Afternoon, how are you?
Well, thanks. How are you, Peter?
Right. My point, it's the student. It's not easy to get past because of the circumstances at school. It is hard. You find the students are learning under the trees, so that is why you find people are getting failed. That's my concern. That's all.
Well, yes, we spoke about that, the children learning under a tree. In the same vein, I just want to pass on this message. We woke up this morning to the news that the MEC for Education in Limpopo has sadly passed on. Tembisile Nedwamutu sadly passed on, and we want to say to her family and her friends that we are with them in their time of hardship. One of the problems is the Peter from Limpopo, an area that, a province that we know, has these schools under trees, says it still continues, that children are still being taught under trees.
I totally disagree. Currently, we do not have schools that are being held under trees. We do have programs, for instance, in a case where you have an increase in learners in a particular school, then we have a program where we are able to provide temporary structures very quickly to ensure that those learners are accommodated.
What are those temporary structures made of?
They're made of prefabricated material, and while we put in measures to provide them with permanent structures, brick and mortar or whatever we will be providing. So in most instances, you might find that there is overcrowding in a school as a result. For instance, when schools reopen this week, we might find that in some schools there is that influx and there is overcrowding in that particular schools, but we have systems in place to deal with that particular eventuality. But at this stage, I can vouch that we do not have any learners learning under a tree.
Zenande, Mr. Mafuku here makes a point that they normally provide prefab schools for kids, and I have seen in some province where these prefab schools stay on for a long time, and people break up, and the children are taught in very adverse conditions.
Yes, I mean the prefab schools or the temporary classrooms are supposed to be an immediate and temporary resolution for any problems with overcrowding, as has just been said. But there is a very big problem with implementing even programs that were just referred to, such as a CD, that work in the smaller provinces, the small rural provinces that have a very massive problem in relation to infrastructure for schools. As much as there has been a rollout of schools being built, but the process is not going as well as we would have hoped. The program is already over. Is already over time. A lot of the provinces that are tasked with implementing it are contending with a lot of issues with the implementation of a CD. Now, because of various issues with capacity within the department, with implementing these policies that are in place to ensure that these temporary structures remain temporary, the reality is these temporary structures tend to go on for much longer than was initially anticipated, and they do stay for a very long time and become essentially permanent, while the schools are still waiting for the department to come in and to give them the permanent structures that are supposed to replace the temporary structures.
Mr. Mafuku,
so there are a lot of issues that the department is...
Yes, continue, carry on.
Yes, I'm saying that there are a lot of issues that the department is contending with, and there's a concerted effort on the part of the department to ensure that there's a massive rollout on everything in relation to the CD programs that are in place and in relation to the implementation of the norms and standards. But these things do take time, and a lot of the time they take much longer than anyone in the equation anticipated, and you find that these structures do stay on for a very long time.
Mr. Mafuku, do you want to comment on that? Because I didn't ask you that question.
Yes, remember, When you provide temporary structures, for instance, temporary structures are provided as an interim measure as a result of a situation that arises. And it is then that you have to start the planning and the budgeting process. In some instances, she's correct, it might take a little bit of time, maybe as a result of budgetary issues and so on. But in the ultimate end, permanent structures are provided to those schools. But we are working very hard to ensure that we do not have those kinds of situations where you have a temporary solution becoming a permanent one.
I was told that you have a long backlog, a huge backlog, because you've got to work with the Department of Public Works. Is that the case?
Not necessarily because of the Department of Public Works. We are working with quite a number of implementing agents. I can mention quite a number: the Independent Development Trust, KUHA, and all those kinds of implementing agents. There are a number of issues that we deal with that lead to delays in implementing our infrastructure program. For instance, like in any building industry issues, you'd find that inclement weather might lead to delays in the implementation of a project. You might have a problem with environmental impact assessments. So there are a number of issues that you need to deal with on a daily basis in any construction program. But we are working very hard. That is why I mentioned earlier on that one of the issues that we had identified earlier on is the lack of capacity in our infrastructure units in provinces to address the challenges as they come. And the reason for that is that we did not have at that time properly qualified people managing those units. So we have made sure that we provide funding to our provinces. We started with about 10 million per province per year. That amount has increased to 26 million to make sure that we retain those people. And we are seeing the fruits of that program with the progress that we are making currently.
Quickly, going into this issue that we are talking about, you provide 10 million. What if a province decides we're going to use the 10 million to pay teachers rather than build schools?
I know, remember that. That money is part of a grant, and grant money is ring-fenced. So even if the province might have a challenge in terms of compensation of employees, they won't have access to that funding. Just like your infrastructure, the budget for the infrastructure that comes from the grant, the province would not have access to that because it is ring-fenced for infrastructure only. And that 10 million from the money that we provide them through the grant is ring-fenced for HR capacity for infrastructure only.
Well, if you'd like to join us in today's discussion, please call us on 011 714 5497 or 5498. We'll be back after the break.
Leaders of Lesotho's governing coalition have advised King Lizia III to lift the suspension of parliament.
We just want everything to go back to normal and to see the parliament opening again.
We'd like to feel safe in our own country. That's the only thing we want.
9 men have been arrested in Mpumalanga by Specialized Police Unit the Hawks. The suspects are believed to be part of a drug smuggling syndicate in 3 provinces. Police say they are part of 22 drug runners that sell cocaine and other drugs in Gauteng. The men were arrested in Evander near Secunda.
Who was that one person that taught you or led you to the point that you know that words can inspire change?
My grandmother. When I told the family that I wanted to be a writer, everybody rebelled against me.
What do you think your contribution and your band's contribution has been to our landscape as we understand it now?
We had to sing songs that are encouraging, and songs that are saying, let's stand up and do it ourselves.
That's Morning Live, daily at 6 a.m. on SABC News.
groei, maar ek is 'n Kaaps. Ja, ek het 'n paar besig. Hoekom?
Welcome back. We continue our discussion on infrastructure at our schools, where we expect our kids to learn and come up with tops and be able to get to university. But the tweets that we have received, some of them, Mr. Mafuku, they still speak about support material for teachers and support for learner teachers. And Kabelo says, Mukiti says, students not having textbooks, the textbooks keep on coming up. And Bongani Abemi from Fuslara says, come to Fuslara to see that schools are overcrowded, not cause of aging, but ineffectiveness of the department. I think that's what he says, because I didn't see the last part there. What's your response to that?
Well, the issue of textbooks, I think you'd agree with us that after the debacle that we had in Limpopo a few years ago, the department has put systems in place to ensure that textbooks are delivered on time. When schools reopen this week, we are quite sure that we would have made sufficient progress to ensure that all our schools have received those kinds of textbooks. When the tweet from about the schools in Fosloras, I think we have discussed the issue of township schools.
Yes.
The issue that we are grappling with and which we think we are beginning to make progress is about the maintenance of schools. Remember, the maintenance of schools starts with what we refer to as day-to-day maintenance, which is the responsibility of the school governing body in a school. Now, for instance, if a window pane gets broken or a door handle gets broken, it is the responsibility of the school to repair that. In some schools, we have a challenge where that is not happening. And you would know even in your house, if you leave a window pane broken, it will lead to other things. So if you leave maintenance and you don't do your maintenance on time, it leads to bigger things. And that is what we are dealing with at the moment. We are developing guidelines for schools in terms of how to maintain their schools. However, when it becomes quite a capital program, then the department will take over and assist in terms of renovating those schools.
I just wanted to get there because you have non-fee paying schools, right. And a school that does where fees are not paid. I understood principals in my day saying they're using the school fees to repair exactly the kind of things you're talking about, repairing a window pane, because as you say, like the police in New York in the old days say, a broken window policy where when a car drives a broken window, you want to know what happened here so that person can tell you who broke the window. And the same with the schools. If the window is not broken in time, then the kids will thought our schools doesn't care. But if you are at a non-fee paying school, where's the money going to come from?
Remember, there is an allocation that gets paid to schools through the norms and standards for school funding. And in that allocation, there is a percentage that is ring-fenced for maintenance. Unfortunately, in some of our schools, that is not used for the purposes that it's meant for. That is where we are putting in efforts to ensure that our district officers assist in monitoring those schools and guiding those principals and governing bodies to make sure that they use that money for its intended purpose.
Zenande, you said earlier that you are monitoring the implementation of the norms and standards. Mr. Mafuku spoke about maintenance of schools, and I think, I don't know whether your mandate goes as far as the norms and standards, only you don't care about the maintenance of schools. Do you look into that?
Yes. Well, some of the campaigns that we run in the schools with our school members, with our school-based members, we call them the equalizers. You should have seen a few weeks ago, or a couple of months ago, in the media, our members in Tembisa ran a campaign relating to sanitation, and then we have kids going around and cleaning toilets and making sure that the toilets are usable for the rest of the schools, and then having learners and equalizers going into the schools and talking about the importance of keeping the toilets clean, of maintaining the infrastructure that kids that do have access to at this moment, to ensure that you don't have a situation where the school gets completely dilapidated and no one does anything in relation to ensuring that that doesn't happen. So we do care about the maintenance of schools, and we do teach our members about respecting the infrastructures that they do have and playing a role in ensuring that they are maintained.
I just want to go back to this issue of maintenance. I know you actually said earlier it's a school governing body function, competency. The question I want to know, what is the role? I looked at some schools, I was in Utnik over the Christmas period. I looked at some schools, the grass is as thick as this, but there is a person who is supposed to be looking after the school, a caretaker in the school. And he does, what is the role of caretakers? I know you said it's a competency of the school governing bodies.
Yeah, the role of the caretaker in a school, and remember that is a government-funded post, is to do exactly those kinds of things. But it goes beyond that. For instance, we are encouraging parents in some instances to volunteer their services, to come in and assist. In some instances, the job might be a bit too much for the caretaker. That is why we are encouraging things like, we used to call them letsema at the beginning of the year, for parents to come in en masse to assist schools to do a cleanup before the learners come in. So it needs a concerted effort from all members of the community to assist our schools to maintain them, so that at the end of the day, our schools in townships and in rural areas are in a condition that enables our learners to learn. So the role of the caretakers, and unfortunately in some provinces, as you mentioned, in some provinces we do not have those, but you do have very innovative ways in some schools where you find that the school governing body will get somebody from the community to come in and assist on a voluntary basis and those kinds of things.
Zenande, one of the other things, it's no good to have a school with all these facilities, all this infrastructure we're talking about, and there are no kids or teachers to teach the kids.
Yes, that's definitely the case. I don't know, do you have a question in there for me?
No, I just want to know, what do we do about that? We have the schools with all the amenities, all the infrastructure, but there are no teachers to teach. What do we do with teacher training?
Our thinking about teacher training has always been that there needs to be a lot more incentive in relation to getting teachers to do the higher education program for a teaching diploma or a teaching qualification, and ensuring that the teachers that do go there, that the really good ones are taken to the more disadvantaged schools, to ensure that they are teaching these kids content that they do know, to ensure that the content that they do teach is very strong, and it gives the kids a competitive edge when they do need to compete with other kids from other schools, from private and public schools.
Well, when we come back, we'll look at solutions and what can we do to improve the situation around infrastructure at our schools. Don't go away. We'll be back right after this.
There's a lot of corruption there. What are you doing with that?
The word corruption is actually misplaced.
Any elements of corruption must be rooted out and punished accordingly.
SASCO is denying that there's any evidence of such.
We've heard the allegations about students not assisting the situation.
Why do you have to be pressurized to do your job, Mr. Msulu?
We spend everything that we get given by government.
It's an excuse.
Who's failing you at government?
Who's failing us at government?
Who's not heeding your call?
The government is the government.
Is Dr. Blade Nzimande doing well?
With what he has done, we want him to do more. We want him to deliver more.
So he's failing.
The Minister of Higher Education, don't put words in my mouth.
Watch Question Time with me, Mpho Tsedu, Monday to Thursday at 5:30 p.m. on the SABC News Channel.
Welcome back, and as we find out going to the final stage of the program, let's have a look at what the Twitter community is saying around these issues. There is a tweet from Thabo Magazi who says, and that will help them not to struggle in their first year at varsity. I've noticed students from Zimbabwe, first years of work, do very well. I think that's what he wanted to say. And Albert Gumbo Chuma says, indisciplined learners are a thorn in the flesh of teachers. And education improving with CAP system, for instance, grade 10 were doing half work, but now they do grade 11 and 12. In other words, they never finish the curriculum last year. Final words from you. Give us a few things that we can do. Probably let me start with Zenanda. My apologies. Zenanda, down in Cape Town, let me start with you. Yes. Give us your final thoughts as to what can we do to improve the situation around infrastructure at our schools and see to it that the norms and standards that you now say have been promulgated by the minister are implemented.
So then, as I said earlier, we have three massive things that we think would go a long way in improving the state of our education system. So that would include the norms and standards that you've just mentioned, that they need to be properly implemented. And a large part of that is transparency in relation to at what point the department is in relation to the implementation, allowing the public to scrutinize the plans that the provinces were meant to have published on the 29th of November. And teacher training is also a very big part. The teachers need to be ready to teach the kids in the classrooms, and the content of that teaching needs to also be strengthened to ensure that when kids do move on, when they are able to move on to higher education, they're able to compete with international kids and kids that went to very different schools to that. So all those things put together.
Mr. Mafuku, let's give you the last few seconds.
Yeah. Remember, we always say that education is a societal issue. And from our side, we would want to see parents and communities getting more involved in the education of our learners, specifically when it relates to infrastructure. I mentioned the issue of maintenance because the 23,000 schools that we have, the large issue that we have to deal with is to ensure that our schools are properly maintained. So we need the community to be part of that process.
Well, it was Langston Hughes who said, what happens to a dream deferred? This has been Right and Recourse. This program is repeated at 10 tonight and 5 on Monday morning. From all of us in the studio, thank you to our guests down in Cape Town, Zenanda Boy and Mr. Mafuku here with me, and good afternoon.